Preocupado el presidente anaranjado, viendo que las elecciones las perdió.
Solicita a los que le hacen los mandados que se apuren pues la fiesta terminó.
Y mirando que se va a acabar el varo,
han formado un titingo. Se han negado a abandonar la Casa Blanca, a la silla del despacho se amarró.
Los pelitos que le quedan los arranca, pataleando por la rabia que le dio.
Y mirando a Cuba con sus patas blancas, de cabeza se tiró.
El que tenga confusión que se confunda, el que quiera claridad que venga a ver.
La jugada no es compleja ni profunda, está claro cómo quieren proceder.
Solo falta que nosotros los dejemos,
y eso no va a suceder.
Con la conga de los hoyos no te metas.
Cuba viva sin que nadie la someta. Mi tierra linda, mi cubanía, mi bandera se respeta. De La Habana para Santiago, defiende lo tuyo, cubano.
que no te metas con mi tierra, que mi Cuba se respeta.
Soy el mambí que aún vive con el machete en la mano. No, 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 no. ¿Qué me importa si comentas?
De donde vengo yo, estamos listos para la contienda. Aguanta ahí, pero dime tú, ¿pa' qué tú inventas?
Con mi pueblo guarachando, yo vine aquí para cantar. Toda Cuba está esperando que yo la ponga a gozar.
Aquí nadie tiene miedo, tú conmigo no te metas. ¡Hey! Oye, soquetón, mi alegría te molesta.
Porque tú me conoces bien en todas mis facetas. Que no tenemos miedo, sal de ahí, no abra esa gaveta.
Tens of thousands of Cubans have gathered once again just across the U.S. Embassy in Havana to show support for former President Raúl Castro amid the accusations made by the Department of Justice of the United States. In the streets, there's a lot of expectation of what this could mean in terms of a possible military aggression against the island. Cubans here insist they don't want a confrontation with the United States, but say they are willing to do so if that's necessary. Raúl Castro, former president of Cuba, was indicted this week for the downing of 2 planes in 1996, a move by the United States that many say could be the excuse for a military aggression against the island.
Hello, hello, hello. Happy Friday and welcome everyone who is watching on Revolution Within the Revolution. We are a show for the National Network on Cuba created to give everyone weekly updates on what is happening on the ground in Cuba, as well as the Cuba Solidarity Movement here in the United States. We meet here on this channel, the National Network on Cuba's channel, every single Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11 p.m. Mountain Time, and 10 p.m. Pacific Time, I believe. So please join us, and we would love to see everybody here. We would love to see you engaged in the chat. My name is Ermia Fanayan. I am one of your hosts. I am joined here with my co-host, Onye and Jasenia. Onye, I'm going to pass it to you to introduce yourself first.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Onyesanu Chatoye. I am a co-host of the Revolution Within the Revolution podcast alongside my comrades. I am one of the 5 elected co-chairs of the National Network on Cuba and an organizer with the Vencemos Brigade, coming to you from the Pacific time zone. And I'll pass it to Jasenia.
Salam alaikum. My name is Jasenia Jasmine. I'm also a member of the National Network on Cuba alongside my comrades.
Oh, I can no longer hear Jasenia, just me.
Oh, no. Can you hear me?
It's very faint.
Sorry, everyone, technical difficulties.
Wait until it doesn't work. Can you hear me better now?
Still pretty faint.
Oh no. Let's see. How about now?
It's almost worse.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know what to do other than probably joining on my phone, most likely. Okay. I guess. Can you hear me better now?
No, I don't think the headset's working.
Yeah. But that's okay. I think what we can do is maybe move on, and then Comrade Jasenia will bring you on here soon. So before we talk about our programming today and what we're going to go over, we wanted to say first and foremost, free Maduro and Celia Flores. They are still being held behind bars after their sham trial held by the terrorist United States after capturing them and illegitimately bringing them here to the country, holding them in New York. So we still say to this day, free Maduro, free Celia Flores. On this episode of Revolution Within the Revolution, which is produced by the National Network on Cuba, we mark May 22nd. And on May 22nd in 1895 was the day that José Martí and Máximo Gómez had signed the Montecristi Manifesto. This manifesto charted Cuba's path to independence. The manifesto was the official program of the Cuban Revolutionary Party and served as the ideological foundation for the War of Independence against Spain. Supported by the masses of Cubans during this time, it also successfully united and mobilized the independence movement and ultimately led to the defeat of Spanish colonialism. So today we celebrate May 22nd, 1895. We also fast forward to 1903, May 22nd, which is when the permanent treaty is signed in Havana. For those who may not know, this document was document produced the first 7 articles of the Platt Amendment, and it established a neo-colonial relationship between Cuba and the U.S., creating the conditions for U.S. intervention in Cuban affairs and formally granting the U.S. the right to lease land for naval bases, including Guantanamo Bay. So this is essentially the legal document all the way back in 1903 that created the precedent for the U.S. to have intervention and to have control of Guantanamo Bay. On today's episode, what we are going to be discussing is the U.S. escalation against Cuba, drones, lies, and a CIA ultimatum as the island runs out of oil and exposing the gusano hasbara machine, CANF. We're also going to discuss the global No War on Cuba campaign and its week of action. And we're also going to talk about hands off Raúl Castro. We're going to talk about who Raul Castro is, why he's a hero to not just the Cuban people, but all revolutionary peoples around the world, and why the US is targeting him and the truth about Brothers to the Rescue. We'll close with what's coming up on next week's show. We'll close with network updates, the Centennial Fidel Brigade fundraiser, and the material aid drive for this Centennial Brigade. We'll also share info about our May 30th National Network on Cuba Spring Summer Meeting. And then we'll also give a final call on the No War on Cuba campaign. So please stay fighting, get organized, share, like, and subscribe so you get all the notifications for Revolution Within the Revolution. I now pass it to Comrade Onye to talk to us about the No War on Cuba campaign.
Thank you so much, Ermia. Greetings, comrade. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hit that like button, share the stream, help us get the eyes up on this podcast because we are covering extremely important information, extremely important truth about the Cuban Revolution, about U.S. and Cuba relations as the U.S. empire continues to escalate against the Cuban people. This week, a lot of ridiculous things have happened. In addition to the continuing surveillance drone flights outside of Havana and Santiago, we also saw 94-year-old Raul Castro indicted for what was essentially an act of self-defense by the Cuban government after repeated violations of U.S. or Cuban airspace by far right-wing Cubans, including participants in the Bay of Pigs invasion. Jasenia is going to give all the details about the truth of why Brothers to the Rescue was shot down by the Cuban Air Force, why that was a rightful act of self-defense. But understand this indictment against Raul Castro is not about justice, is not about correcting a crime. It is purely about attacking the Cuban Revolution, escalating against Cuba, and providing a pretext for a military intervention against the island. As a matter of fact, after the farce of indicting a 94-year-old man for an act of self-defense 30 years ago, we saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio give a speech in Spanish from Florida that he claimed was directly addressing Cubans on the island. In the extended speech, he basically said that the U.S. blockade on Cuba isn't actually hurting Cubans, it's only hurting the communists. And it's really the communists that are the reason why Cuba has no access to food, Cuba has no access to oil, Cuba has no access to basic resources, not because the U.S. is intentionally and systematically trying to isolate Cuba, trying to cut it off from the global economic system to cause suffering and hardship for the Cuban people, to force them to rise up and overthrow their own government, something that the U.S. government has openly admitted in such documents as the Mali Memorandum. But no, what Marco Rubio claimed in that speech was that, no, none of that's actually happening. Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe your lived experience. No. Actually, the U.S. is trying to help you by starving you, and it's the communists that are to blame. So Belly of the Beast, our comrades, are really, really great progressive media project focused on spreading the truth about the Cuban Revolution. We're actually on the ground in Havana after that speech was given by Rubio, looking for the response of Cubans on the ground to Rubio's speech. So I'm going to play a video now from our comrades at Belly of the Beast with some street interviews with Cubans responding to Marco Rubio. So let's see what they actually think about it.
¿Usted ha visto el video, el mensaje que subió el secretario de Estado de los Estados Unidos, Marco Rubio?
No, realmente no. Es que Marco Rubio lo desprecio tanto que no vale la pena ni oír nada de lo que dice.
No, yo no he visto nada.
No lo he visto.
Ahora, ¿usted cree que le pueda mostrar el video un momentico y usted me dice qué le parece?
La razón por la que se ven obligados a sobrevivir 22 horas al día sin electricidad no se debe a un bloqueo petrolero por parte de Estados Unidos.
Para nadie es un secreto que el bloqueo sí existe, porque si el bloqueo no existiera, entonces dejen pasar los barcos.
Los apagones en Cuba, el embargo petrolero tiene que ver, mucho que ver, porque se dio en cuanto apareció el barco ruso. Bueno, la gente estaba contenta porque los apagones no es que cesaron un 100%, pero sí un 90%.
Pero la realidad dice que desde que ellos cerraron el cerco, ¿entiendes? Se aumentaron más de 20 horas de apagones.
Eso ya estaba pensado, parece, porque hace 3 días eran los 300 drones, ¿no? Y de pronto ahora, Raúl, lo que siempre tienen que tener es una justificación para tener como la política, no sé, justificando el bloqueo, justificando el embargo de petrolero y esas cosas. Cuba no es amenaza militar para nadie. ellos sí son una amenaza militar para cualquiera. Cuba, a ver, Cuba es un país que sí, que tiene su preparación y esas cosas, pero Cuba no es amenaza militar para nadie, para esa gran potencia, para nada. Ellos saben que no.
Un país que se rige por la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, que realmente lo único que hace es irradiar al mundo de paz, brindándole médicos, brindándole de todo tipo de ayuda humanitaria, no puede representar ninguna amenaza, y menos por un imperio.
Pero a pesar de los malestares, hay que ver la marcha del día 1 de mayo. Porque una cosa lo que dicen allá y otra cosa la que vivimos, y tenemos que defender hasta la muerte aquí. Claro. Eso es ya la respuesta que te puedo decir. Marcos Rubio él no tiene ni sentido de lo que es patria.
So that was, again, a video from our comrades at Belly of the Beast talking to Cubans on the street in Havana, getting their responses to basically like a 45-minute speech full of lies in Spanish by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And as you can see, like the Cuban population, I tell this to people all the time, people claim that Cuba is a dictatorship, that the Cuban people are oppressed by the Cuban government, but they have free education through postgraduate school. They have military training. They have a high level of social organization and engagement in the organization of their society, in the organization of their government, meaning that they are a highly educated, armed, and militarily trained populace. If they were not into communism, if they did not support the Cuban government would not be in place. And so for Marco Rubio to fix his face, to say that the fact that the U.S. is turning oil ships away from Cuba, engaging in constant drone surveillance to make sure no oil ships are docking in Cuba, is blockading Cuba, is preventing Cuba from opening bank accounts, from obtaining loans. Of course, those are deliberate acts that are having a direct impact on the day-to-day conditions of the Cuban people. And of course, the Cuban people understand that. The Cuban Revolution invested in the education of its citizens. It's not like the capitalist U.S. government, which has systematically disinvested in public education in order to produce a population that is easily propagandized. You can't actually do that to Cubans. So the speech that Marco Rubio gave in Spanish, even though it's directed to the Cubans, they are not buying it. They are not buying it. They're too revolutionary in consciousness. It's only going to work on extremely confused people in the United States, such as the far right-wing Cuban population in Miami, which is really the true target of this escalation by the Trump administration. Because what Trump is trying to do, what the Trump administration is trying to do, what Marco Rubio is trying to do is to recover after taking L's in Iran, after being militarily defeated by the revolutionary Iranian people, after taking an L in China. They went to China with hat in hand, with like half the ruling class of the United States, asking for loans, asking for support, asking for China's backup in Iran. And China said, we're good. We're not going to help y'all. Get out of our face. So they took multiple L's on the geopolitical stage. They are looking for an easy win. They are feeling very, very nervous about those midterm elections. And so now Cuba and the Cuban people have to pay. This is not about justice for Cuba. This is not about fighting for the Cuban people on the part of the U.S. It is the U.S., specifically the genocidal U.S. blockade against Cuba, that is the issue in the situation. And Marco Rubio's speech was insulting to conscious and aware people who understand the reality of U.S. and Cuba relations, the reality that the U.S. has maintained an intentionally antagonistic relationship towards Cuba this whole time. It was insulting. The Cuban people are rightfully insulting. The right-wing Cubans in Miami are the only people that are buying it, and they are also the driving force behind this newest escalation. Because the indictment of Raul Castro, months before it came down in March, three far right-wing congresspeople, gusanos, Cubans, sent a letter to President Trump requesting that this indictment against Raul Castro be made. This has been a bugbear of right-wing Cubans for a long, long time. They've had it stuck in their craw that the Brothers to the Rescue attempts to overthrow the Cuban Revolution were successfully repelled by the Cuban government, and they've been fighting for this indictment for a long time. It's also why the Clinton administration signed the Helms-Burton Act. We have to understand that a relatively small number of extremist right-wing Cubans in Miami drive so much of U.S. policy towards Cuba, and it is entirely irrational. And it also does not represent the best interests of the masses of people in Cuba, the island of 11 million people that is suffering because of the irrationality of the right-wing Cuban base and right-wing organizations like the Cuban American National Foundation, which, in addition to being a really extremist lobby group driving a really irrational US-Cuba policy, have also armed, backed, and funded many, many terrorist attacks against the Cuban Revolution, openly targeting civilians, blowing up airliners, blowing up hotels, engaging in straight up invasions like at the Bay of Pigs. There is a long history of this cursed alliance between right-wing Cubans who oppose the revolution and the US government directly targeting Cuba, attempting to destabilize it internally. So again, the charges are a farce. It is just a way for the US to manufacture a pretext for intervention in Cuba. That is precisely what the Raul Castro indictment is about. In addition to that indictment coming down on Wednesday, we also received word that the USS Nimitz, one of the world's largest nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, was moved by the U.S. military Southern Command to the Caribbean Sea within striking distance of Cuba. The USS Nimitz includes fighter jets, destroyers, and missile systems capable of carrying out air strikes. And so this is a very intentional and provocative antagonism against Cuba. The US government, the Trump administration, are continuing to escalate. They are continuing to directly threaten Cuba with violence and increasing starvation in order to try to force them to submit. This is straight up open bullying by the US government against the Cuban people. So this provocation by the Trump administration, by Marco Rubio, they are not going unanswered. Longtime friends of Cuba, Russia, and China immediately put out statements condemning the indictment of Raul Castro, condemning the escalation of U.S. attacks on Cuba, and calling them what they are, attempting to manufacture a pretext for U.S. military invasion of the island. Russia, in particular, promised strong and active support. They, of course, previously broke the U.S.-imposed oil blockade by sending an oil ship to Cuba, but unfortunately that oil has since run out. But Russia is promising more support. So Cuba is not alone on the international stage, and Cuba is not alone when it comes to the forces of social justice all over the planet. The National Network on Cuba is anchoring an international No War on Cuba campaign. The initial foundation of that campaign was established during the International May Day Brigade that finished at the end of May. Many nations from around the world sent contingents to Cuba to celebrate International Workers' Day alongside our Cuban comrades. And during the May Day Brigade, all of those international delegations had a meeting to begin to plan out a global response to U.S. military intervention on Cuba, #No War on Cuba. So what we have united on doing is an international week of action taking place from June 28th to July 4th, baby. We are going to use that Yankee holiday, that holiday celebrating imperialism and settler colonialism, to instead resist imperialism, to instead resist attacks against the Cuban Revolution that was intentionally selected. But we also know that things are escalating day by day. The situation is very dire. Trump is making direct threats of invasion. They moved the Nimitz, so we might not have until June 28th, comrades. And so we are also calling for rapid response mobilizations throughout the United States and all over the planet as an immediate response to any U.S. military attack on Cuba. We need folks out on the street the very same day it happens, all over the world. And in Chicago, in Massachusetts, in Minneapolis, in Michigan, people are already making plans. Basically, the day that the U.S. attacks Cuba, we have to move. There have to be thousands of people on the street all over the world saying that we will not accept this. The U.S. government has to see that if they hit Cuba, we are going to rise up. We are going to turn up. We will not accept it. So please participate in the International Week of Action, June 28th to July 4th. And when the U.S. strikes Cuba, find the rapid response mobilization near you, take to the streets, raise your voice saying we will not accept this. Additionally, the National Network on Cuba and the Vencedemos Brigade are joining forces for the Centennial Fidel Brigade. We discussed it on the show before. It is happening August 1st to August 15th. We are still going. It is very important for us to show up for Cuba in this time, to bring material aid, to bring our bodies, to bring our actions in order to support the Cuban Revolution. So the Centennial Fidel Brigade will not be canceled in the event of a U.S. attack on Cuba. We are still going to go. We are, in fact, launching a national fundraiser to raise funds for material aid. That link is live. I just put it up on the screen. We'll put it up again throughout the show. We are raising funds to bring as much material aid to the island as possible. We are also raising funds to provide partial scholarships for poor and working class, colonized, queer and trans brigadistas to make sure that the front lines of social justice struggles in the United States are present for the Centennial Fidel Brigade, that the cost of the trip, which is quite high because of capitalism, is not an obstacle to the people that need to be there. And we also know that it is likely that as the U.S. attacks against the Cuban Revolution escalate, that they will begin to target solidarity delegations in the solidarity movement. And so we want to make sure that we have the flexibility to pivot if our travel plans need to change. And so contributing to our fundraiser gives us that flexibility. So the link is on the screen, bit.ly/aid for COF. Please donate. I'll also put it in the chat, and we'll also be putting it up on the screen throughout the program. But if the U.S. attacks Cuba, the Centenary of Fidel Brigade is going regardless. You cannot blockade solidarity. You will not intimidate us against supporting the Cuban Revolution. This is the moment to show that Cuba is not alone, and we intend to do so. The time to act is now. So to talk more in detail about why this U.S. government indictment against Raul Castro is some hot nonsense, I'm going to bring back Comrade Jasenia. Hold on. And then I'm going to take my face off the screen because I'm tired of talking. Take it away, Jasenia.
Thank you so much, Comrade Onye. Can y'all hear me now? I hope so, because I can't see anybody else on the screen, but I'm happy to be back. And yeah, as Comrade Onye said, the indictment that the United States imperialist government issued out and has accused Raul Castro, Rus, who's a leader of the revolution, a Cuban army general and a deputy of the National Assembly of People's Power, is a hot mess. It's completely despicable and legally unsound. Also because the accusations come, as Comrade Onye mentioned, the United States is unable to take an L and to accept the L that they've received in terms of attempting to do regime change in Iran, and the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic resistance of Iran stands steadfast in defending the homeland despite the martyrdom of Ayatollah Khamenei. And I mean, the imperialists have a very naive and wrongful perception that if they continuously go after world leaders, that's going to diminish the revolutionary spirit of the people. And as we saw with Imam Ali Khamenei inspiring the people of Iran to continue to stay steadfast in their resistance, we see this in the attitude and the resilience and the character of the revolutionary people of Cuba, who, as we saw in the clip that was shared earlier, were very present in Havana to denounce the illegitimate accusations from the United States against Raul. And I think it was projected around over 250,000 people were present. So it just shows once again that there is support for the Cuban Socialist Revolutionary Project, and that the government and the people are united as one. There is no separation despite the constant attempts from the United States to cause destabilization or discontent within the people, so they act against their well wishes and go against the government that is continuously pushing forward the revolution to achieve the means, right? So to talk a bit about Raul Castro before getting into the details of the nonsense and the blasphemous indictment that was issued against Raul, he was one of the few revolutionaries that survived the disembarkation off of the Grandma yacht, which was the yacht that Fidel Castro acquired in Mexico to be able to travel from Mexico to Cuba to engage and start the revolutionary war against the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. And this was an effort that was done with a wide array of comrades, most notably Che, of which Raul actually bridged the connection between Fidel and Che in Mexico, but also Vilma Espina, of which he is or was the husband of Vilma Espina, who was a revolutionary who fought against the Batista dictatorship and also founded the Federal Cuban Women's Union and was also the inspiration behind the name of the show, which is also based on a proclamation from Fidel himself that women's participation in the revolution is the revolution within the revolution. So there's always a very blatant consciousness as to being forefront in honoring and respecting women's participation in the revolutionary project, which is completely opposite from the character and the reality that was in existence the pre-revolution under the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, who was an imperialist puppet. He was essentially a lackey for the United States, and he turned Cuba or made Cuba into a playground for the American mafia and corporations who continued to push forward ignorance, imperialism, and debauchery in Cuba. And Florencio, a racist, corrupt man, even allowed for US banks and corporations to control major sectors and enforce essentially chattel slavery or enforce economic cohesion exploitation against Afro and indigenous Cubans who essentially had their labor stolen from them, and the profits from that labor contributed to most of the control that the United States had over banks and corporations in Cuba, in which they held control in major industries like 90% in Cuban mines, 80% in public utilities, which includes gas, light, electricity, water, 50% in railways, 40% in sugar production, and 25% in its bank deposits. And it's actually estimated that on the eve of the revolution, over $1 billion in stolen funds were reappropriated and put back into the hands of the people. And as I briefly mentioned, Batista particularly had no respect for the Republic of Cuba. He had no respect for the Cuban people and for the dignity of women, of children, because he allowed for the Revolutionary Republic to be treated as a haven for forced sex labor, brothels, and gambling. And when the triumph of the revolution came about and basically Batista was cornered, he very cowardly fled to the occupied nation of Santo Domingo, which is also known as East Haiti. But it just shows exactly the character of those who push forward neocolonialism and imperialism within their own homelands because they honor or value the dollar more than the dignity of people, versus the revolutionary character of leaders such as Raul Castro, who has the support of the Cuban people, because as we saw in the video, but also just seeing other videos from testimonies and reflections from the Cuban people, they blatantly say that to go against Raul is to be betraying the patria, and that it's not something that should be allowed and it cannot be allowed, right? There is no fear when it comes to defending the homeland, but if it can be achieved through conversation, it's something that is of interest to our Cuban comrades, as long as it's rooted in respect and fairness. And this is something that Raul himself upheld, because during, I think, the cool down period in Cuba, where there was more, I guess, warmer relationships between the United States and Cuba, Raul tried to find balance with a war criminal and imperialist himself, Barack Obama, to, I guess, restore the tourist sector, to make sure that there was more ease or less tightening on the unilateral cohesive measures. But unfortunately, the imperialists always show their face. They always show their true character. So that was something after Barack Obama was voted out. He finished his second term. The current dictator, Donald Trump, was unfortunately elected and squashed all of those relations with Cuba, and is presently using an incident that happened in the 90s to bring forward bogus charges to continuously distract from the truth that the United States, alongside Israel, Argentina, Costa Rica, the Saudi Arabia, other reactionary governments are continuously having and forcing us globally to live under oppression and exploitation and continuously facilitate genocides in Palestine, in Congo, and Sudan, but also do economic and environmental tightenings, exploitation, and essentially a genocidal, unilateral cohesive measures, a genocidal blockade on Cuba, on other nations who continuously just want to uphold humanity above all things and to just try to see how we can bring about socialism into our nations because it is our right as comrades of Cuba to support their socialist revolutionary project, but also to push forward that wherever it is that we find ourselves being residents of, right? So essentially, Raul is an example of upholding this principle, this revolutionary clarity that to defend the homeland is to defend it by any means necessary, which is what happened in February of 1996. So essentially, the illegitimate accusation against Raul Castro is that in February of 1996, there was a downing of two hostile aircrafts, I want to reiterate that were operated by the Miami-based terrorist organization Brothers to the Rescue, which is being manufactured or painted the picture in the bourgeois corporate media as just being a regular um, humanitarian organization, but that is completely false and further from the truth. This organization was actually created by the three-lettered evil agency known as the CIA, of which the founder of said organization is a self-proclaimed CIA pig operative, and he has admitted in the past to committing terrorist acts against Cuba, like firing a cannon at a hotel. So Comrade Onye made mention that the United States continuously uses terrorist organizations that are usually based in Florida due to the proximity between and the distance between the two to do unlawful, unjust, and unprecedented attacks against civilians, against innocent people, children, mothers, fathers, the elderly, the sick, and attacking hotels and homes and communities where people are just living and being in community with one another. And in the 90s, they were throwing cannons at hotels, thinking that it was justifiable because they wanted to forcefully bring about change within a society that is first and foremost a socialist revolutionary society. And to implement change comes through conversation, patience, and diligence. It doesn't come through violence and disrespect, which is something that the imperialists consistently force us to have to endure. So essentially, the Brothers to the Rescue bogus organization is was downed. These people were rightfully, killed because it is within the complete right of the Cuban people of revolutionary Cuba to defend its homeland. And after multiple communicated boundaries and warnings that there were violations and unlawful presence in the airspace that continuously went ignored, that's what happened, right? There's a saying, I'm not gonna say the word, but it's basically like and find out, right? And they found out that they were not supposed to be there, and it was completely serious that they were going to be held accountable because, again, la patria se defiende. So the United States, as it always does, it has not been, it's been manipulating the situation. It's been omitting numerous complaints that were actually requested by Cuban attorneys, by the legal team, essentially, that launched an investigation against this unlawful presence in Cuba's airspace to bring accountability to the imperialist government of the United States. And even then, and even now, it was revealed that they omitted documents that were very pivotal to bringing forward these violations. And this is not something that just our Cuban comrades said was a violation. Multiple agencies, federally and internationally, such as the International Civil Aviation Organization, said that there were over 25 deliberate, 25 deliberate violations that were identified and communicated numerously that went ignored. I mean, it's within the nature of our enemy to not take things into account and to continuously be complicit in exploitation and oppression, as we see them do time and time again, and they are currently doing now. So I mean, our Cuban comrades hold it very clear. Revolutionary Cuba holds it very clear that the United States, it has revealed time and time again its involvement in planning and executing violent, illegal, terrorist acts against the revolutionary Cuban government and its people, and a reoccurring practice from the triumph of the revolution till now with the enforcement of unilateral cohesive measures, also known as sanctions, and el bloqueo, the blockade, to block commercial, financial, and economic trade and enterprise. And as we already communicated, to bring about discontent within the people so that they go against the ongoing socialist revolutionary project. And we know that the accusations that are being brought forth against Raul Castro just shows blatantly that the imperialists, our enemy, has no moral conscience, and that they consistently, like I said in the beginning, they naively believe that if they attack leaders, that this is going to diminish the revolutionary character and the revolutionary resolve of just people who faithfully believe that a better world is possible. That every single time when we, blatantly state that we are faithful to the revolution, it is because we believe in justice and peace and harmony. And this is something that the Cuban people, the revolutionary government, has shown time and time again that they believe and that they will uphold no matter what. And if it isn't clear to the fact that what is currently happening is an attempt to bring about to just continue the legacy of pushing forward intimidation tactics to get nations and countries to stop building solidarity bridges with one another, finding ways to come to each other's like defense and to defend the sovereignty of its people. They do this as well because, as we see with the resistance in Iran, in Palestine, and the AES, the imperialists are running out of tactics and they're becoming very fearful of the fact that their time is very limited because their patience has run thin, right? Seeing 3 years of brothers and sisters, siblings constantly have to be attacked and forced to endure the worst atrocities that humanity has seen in modern day society. And we have consistently been forced to endure a reality of having to experience horror after horror and find the resolve to continue pushing onward. Those days are very limited for the imperialists because, again, our patience is running thin. And I think, as comrades have said on this call, as Cuban comrades have said time and time again, we live within the belly of the beast. So we have a very difficult task and a very large responsibility in the fact that we have to expose the hypocrisies of the imperialist Yankee government while at the same time dismantling it to make sure that we put an end to imperialism wherever it is, but also, as Comrade Onyesanu mentioned, we make sure that no war comes to Cuba, right? And if the imperialists decide that they want to attack, that they want to act on their claims, then we need to make sure that we are rapidly responding the day of. Like, we can't wait. We can't, hold in our minds a fear for what repression we might face, because we live within the belly of the beast. This is a responsibility that we have to take very seriously, and is something that our Cuban comrades have tasked us with, because globally, the entire resistance are the guardians of humanity. We are essentially the soldiers of peace, if we want to view it in that way, right? And we have to keep in mind that we are against a government who has no qualm and has consistently showed us that they do not have any respect for human life. And as we unfortunately have been seeing, over 200 siblings, for 200 people have been murdered in the Caribe and in international waters and the Pacific, and they have destroyed 57 vessels, which consisted of fishermongers, of fishermen, of fisherwomen, of fisher people, just finding food in order to feed themselves and their communities the most natural way possible, which is something that our ancestors practiced. This is a constant onslaught against African and indigenous communities who are just trying to come back to their roots and be guardians of the environment, and to not take more than we need, and to live in a world of respect. And consistently, the imperialists have shown us that they do not have that at their forefront, and nor are their hearts tender enough in order to hold that level of respect and love for people. And this is the same government that has manufactured the war on drugs and poisoned our neighborhoods and stole futures from those who struggle against the shadows of this world and find themselves stuck in addiction. This government, the United States, is also the biggest drug trafficker or exporters in the world. And all they do is export bombs and weapons that go to kill innocent people globally. And as Comrade Onye made mention of, the United States has airspace, an airplane in Cuban airspace that can do harmful, damaging, destructive things if they were to drop it, right? So this is something that we have to consistently fight and advocate and consistently speak out against, because we don't want to continuously live in a world where the people that we love run at risk of losing their lives just for protecting their sovereignty in the most inhumane and despicable way. And we have to fight consistently against the tactics that the United States government, that the shaitanis of the United States continuously push forward through their manipulation tactics, their lying, and their efforts to squander and cause hardship in a people, forgetting that the resolve of a noble people is much stronger and will be victorious every single time. And as Raul mentioned in a speech that was delivered by one of the heroes of the Cuban Revolution, that there is no fear, right, for defending the patria. There is no fear against the the possibility of the United States acting on their threats, because the Cuban people reaffirmed their unwavering commitment to again defend humanity and defend the patria, to defend its socialist revolution, and to continue being a pillar of global resistance against colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism, and injustice wherever it stands. And I, myself, and I'm sure that my comrades on this call very vehemently and very vehemently hold in solidarity and in defense of Raul Castro Ruz. And we say hands off Raul and viva Raul. And we hold steadfast to the resolve that we have for Cuba's right to self-defense and sovereignty. And I know that as revolutionaries and as organizers who will continuously push forward and build up the revolutionary consciousness of the people living here in the belly of the beast, our hearts will never harden because we acknowledge, as our Cuban comrades consistently tell us, that they have clarity as to what is truthful and what isn't. And we, despite the fact that we hold no fear, right? I think it's important to mention and to reiterate that our Cuban comrades have still held on to the resolve that if peace could come through dialogue, then that is a measure that should be explored. But it's also holding the understanding that the imperialist does not have a moral conscience, and that if by any means necessary, in order to secure sovereignty and to allow Cuba to exist as she chooses to, with the consent and the involvement of the Cuban revolutionary government and the Cuban revolutionary people, that's something that is within their total right. And there's something that um, the uh, the Shias in Iran hold very steadfast, is that the imperialists threaten war globally. They threaten war against Iran, Cuba, against Venezuela, against the Caribe, Latin America, Africa, Asia, because they think that that's what's going to cause fear or cement or root fear in our hearts. But we're not dead yet, right? And if it's necessary, right, to defend humanity, to defend the revolution, I think that this is something that each comes to the understanding of what they're willing to sacrifice or what they're not to. But I think that those on this call are more than willing to defend humanity by any means necessary. But it's also holding on to the understanding that the fight against imperialism is the forefront struggle that we have presently, and to make sure that war does not come to Cuba is the struggle that we will prioritize, because we do not want that onto the people of Cuba, and we do not want there to be a moment in our lives that the revolutionary government of Cuba has to put on the forefront the entire nation on defense in order to make sure that the revolution stands, because people will die, and we don't want that, right? We don't want to see people continuously die. And with that, I just want to close by saying glory to our martyrs, glory to the revolution, abajo el imperialismo, and inshallah, patria o muerte, venceremos. Thank you. I'll pass it to Comrade Armia to get us grounded with the closing. And thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Comrade Jasenia, for that incredible segment. We wanted to close out today's show going over some network updates. So the first update is that the Centennial Fidel Brigade's national fundraiser is now up, and we are sending the link through the chat right now. Please consider donating and helping our work on Fidel's centennial year. We are needing as many donations as we can get to send brigadistas. As Comrade Onye said, this is the time to send folks to Cuba, and we are not going to stop this work no matter what kind of obstacles come in our way. The material aid drive for the same August Brigade is launching next week. So please stay tuned on our social medias, join us on Revolution Within the Revolution, and keep up to date as to how you can donate material aid to the Centennial Brigade. May 30th is our general meeting, and new bylaws will be introduced at this meeting. So please register now. Registration is now up. You should have gotten an email if you are signed up to our email list. You can go on the National Network on Cuba's website. So please make sure you are registered in advance. On next week's show, we will be joined by brigadistas from this year's May Day Brigade to discuss the aid support sent to Cuba. The U.S. delegation alone brought over $600,000 in aid just this year to Cuba. So please join us next week as we discuss this with brigadistas. And we also want to reiterate the call for no war on Cuba. This is our international campaign, our strategy, and the conviction that is leading our movement. No war on Cuba, no war on Cuba. There will be no war on Cuba so long as our solidarity exists. Viva Cuba, all power to the people, comrades, and we will see you next week.
Eran las 3 de la mañana, 3 de enero en el calendario. Caracas dormía tranquila bajo su manto diario, pero el cielo no trajo sol, trajo un ruido de metal. Y en Fuerte Tiuna se rompió el silencio habitual. No fueron truenos de lluvia, fueron botas extranjeras que cruzaron sin permiso nuestras líneas y fronteras. La noticia corre como pólvora, la pantalla se congela. Se han llevado al presidente, hay fuego en Venezuela. Liberen a Nicolás, grita una parte del mapa. Mientras la garra del norte su sentencia destapa. Dicen que va hacia el norte sobre el mar prisionero, en las entrañas de acero de un buque extranjero. Que el mundo se detenga, que nadie quede mudo. Hoy la historia se parte. Liberen a Maduro. Hoy en Moscú escuchas el eco en el Caribe. Si cae un socio, el equilibrio no sobrevive. Pekín levanta la vista, el dragón debe mirar que las flotas del imperio han vuelto a navegar. Hermano en La Habana, sandinista en Nicaragua, saben que esta misma lluvia mañana será su agua. Si hoy tocan a uno y lo sacan de su cama, mañana su justicia incendiará toda la rama. Dicen que el Iwo Jima navega con la presa, que van rumbo a Nueva York a servirlo en la mesa. Trump firma la orden, Petro mira con espanto. ¿Es justicia o es venganza lo que cubre con su manto? Las bombas en la Carlota dejaron su marca en el suelo. Un pájaro de hierro se lo llevó en pleno vuelo. Para el que celebra en Miami, para el que llora en el barrio, esto no es solo un hombre, es un cambio de escenario. La soberanía sangra cuando el juez es el verdugo y la libertad no nace bajo la sombra del yugo. Venezolano, despierta, sea cual sea tu color. Hoy tu tierra fue pisada por la bota del invasor. El mundo aguanta la respiración, la moneda está en el aire. Nadie sabe el costo, nadie sabe el desaire. Desde el sur hasta el oriente, el mensaje es duro.